Well, welcome to today's installment of Smart Inclusion. It's a series of video conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. SmartSearch has been developing our HR technology platform and AI search tools to support diversity in hiring. So we've been talking with our clients, industry advocates, and thought leaders about challenges, trends, and practical solutions for employers on how to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace. So today we're talking with Kelli McLean Slade. She is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Relias,
Mhm.
where she serves as a hands-on leader in DEI and takes a very collaborative approach to resolving problems, implementing change through strategic business alignment, creative thinking,
Mhm.
motivational training, and coaching. And Kelli is a highly accomplished and results-driven career development facilitator in DEB&I as
Mhm.
an advocate with over 20 years experience in workforce development, training and assessment, and relationship building with employees, colleges, universities, local and state agencies, and diverse communities and organizations. So thank you very much for joining me today, Kelli. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. That intro was awesome. Thank you.
Well, I've been excited because your topic today is titled Diversity Starts with Us. And
Mhm.
where else can it start? Right.
Right,
So I'm
right.
hoping we can start by you telling us a little bit more, sharing a little more thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about diversity starting with us, individuals, I will say, get confused by that. To give you an example, my title at Relias is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging. But in no way does that mean that other individuals can't do the same work. And so when we say it starts with us, it truly does. There is no one person that facilitates or puts that cape on their back and does this work by themselves. In order for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to not only start, but to be able to maintain it, you have to have everybody's hands in it. And so when we say starting with us, we have to look at who we are as individuals, what our awareness is or what it's not. And we have to identify that and say, you know what? This is what I can do. This is my part in this. And then not only put yourself in that, but then grow with it as well. And so I think if we allow ourselves to grow, to become aware and become a part of a true solution, then in all honesty, these conversations that we're having will become second nature. I never want to talk myself out of a job, in all honesty. But if we were where we were supposed to be, just in the world in general, then I wouldn't be here, right? Like in terms of director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think when we all start to take that self-assessment pill, which is like that huge pill you get from the doctor's office that you gotta chug some water behind that pill to make sure it digests. If we start to take that pill and really figure out where we are and what we can do in our efforts, then we'd be in a much better place. And so I think that's what it means when I say diversity starts with us, no one else
Yeah.
but us.
I want to ask you a little more about that self-assessment pill,
Oh yeah,
okay?
yes.
Because I can definitely see how that's where the journey would have to start.
Oh
I
yeah.
recently completed a LinkedIn learning program that was
Mhm.
presented by Stacy Gordon of Rework Work. Are you familiar
Yes,
with
I
her?
am. Yes.
She talked a lot about the unconscious bias and
Oh yeah.
how that comes through with self-awareness, right? You're
Oh
not going to be
yes.
able to uncover your unconscious bias. Can you speak a little more about that then, especially with respect to that pill?
Yeah. So, when we talk about, there's the unconscious bias and then there's, the conscious bias, right? But when we really think about it, even though there's a difference, there really shouldn't be, right? When we take that self-assessment pill, I often tell, folks when I'm doing trainings, the baby aspirin that you can get at Walgreens, you can like take that baby aspirin, you can chew it up and get a little bit of orange juice and it's gone. You're good for the day. But when you have that huge pill, like the pills that are this size, right? That self-assessment pill, that's not as easy as taking a swig of orange juice and allowing it to digest. When you take that self-assessment pill, you are now saying to yourself, why do I think this about individuals or an organization or whoever it may be? Why do I think this? Where did that thought come from? Was it from an experience that I had, or did somebody tell me that? And when you look at those things, now you're dissecting everything you've thought about, whoever told you anything, in this lifetime, and you're having to go back and say, now, was that completely true? Or is that the way I should be thinking? And that scares individuals, because now if I'm now questioning what I'm saying, then I have to question what I've been taught. And I think that's a lot of times where grace and mercy comes in. I will say to you that looking at me, I am an African-American female, but no one may know that I had a grandmother who was not African-American, she was white. And so white and Native American. And so when we have these ideas of what things are supposed to look like and what they're supposed to be, when we take that self-assessment pill, it breaks it down. And it can be a painful process. It could be a process that causes a lot of fear, but at the end of the day, that's the process that makes you feel good at the end, because you can go into something and say, that was me then. I see a different perspective now, which allows for a shift. And anytime you have a shift, you're going to have growth. You're going to have increase.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when we're looking at these biases, we got to be honest with ourselves, starting with us, why we feel a certain way. And is that really the way to think?
Right. Exploring the why. Why
Yes.
do you think that? Like, why did you make that assumption? Because Stacy had touched on the different kinds of biases that there are, like affinity bias, like just because we went to the same school and we're sorority sisters, doesn't mean you're a perfect person or the perfect candidate for that job.
Yes.
Right. But I might be inclined to hire you because we had that shared value or experience or whatever it is. So you got to think about where that came from, like where that bias came from. And you were talking about what Stacy would call perception bias or even confirmation bias. So these are kind of wired into you because your brain has to calculate a million things at the same time. And so this is a human thing. It's not that you're prejudiced, right? It's just that your brain is wired to view things based on your experience, your perceptions, what you've been told. Right. And the group think, that was the other thing that Stacy said that really resonated with me. Like when you're in a group of people and everybody thinks this, it's a little harder to speak out and say, I'm going to disagree with that. Okay. And I don't really get where you're going.
Yeah. And I think, especially when you're talking about that, we got to get to a place where we feel empowered to say what needs to be said and understand with grace and mercy, everybody doesn't have to agree. And I think that's where we're not there yet. So, if we're in a group of individuals and, everybody's thinking one thing and I'm really thinking something else, but I'm not speaking up, to the way I see it. Why aren't I speaking up? Right? Is it for fear of, they're going to look at me this way, or I'm not going to be perceived this way? With diversity, equity, and inclusion, the reason it can be so tricky at times, nobody is perfect. So, there's an exercise I often do with individuals. It's called I am not, right? And so I say very quickly, I am a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am not perfect. And so when we start to understand that we are not perfect beings and that we can continue to learn as long as we're willing to receive, then we will feel empowered to speak up on certain things and be okay with agreeing to disagree. Right. And that's the place. Yes, that's where we need to get to. Absolutely.
And take the little pill. I want to point out that baby aspirin is actually a lot stronger. Like if you were to chop up the big pill, the big aspirin, the baby aspirin is actually stronger than a similar size of the regular
Yep.
besides aspirin. And that was kind of surprising to me. Like, you can OD on baby aspirin a lot
Oh,
faster.
yes, you can.
But if you don't OD, it actually is a more potent pill
Yeah.
because you're really focusing on the one thing. Let's talk a little bit more. Like, do you have any advice for individuals? Like, let's take it down to the individual
Yeah.
who how they can do more but are uncertain or maybe fearful about how to start that conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion, and or belonging.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things we all have to do, we have to learn to lean in differently, right? And so if I'm fearful of having a conversation, I think it does take a little bit of that self-assessment to figure out why I feel uncomfortable having a certain conversation.
Mhm.
But not only that, lean in different. Ask questions of individuals. Be vulnerable. Listen, I want to have this conversation, or I want to ask you this question, but I don't know how to ask it. I may offend you. I don't want to offend you, but there are things that I want to know. And I think if we start leaning in different and asking questions of individuals that can answer or even just provide a different perspective, then again, it becomes second nature. I will also say, listen, we have uncomfortable conversations all the time. I am one who, I don't go into somewhere and say, oh, we're about to have an uncomfortable conversation. Because if you weren't uncomfortable in the beginning, now you're about to be uncomfortable because I said we're
It's
going
going
to
to
have
be
an
uncomfortable.
uncomfortable. Exactly. But what I do say is that we have challenging conversations, and we have those every day. We have those in the workplace. We have them at home. We have them at the grocery store. We have them with our neighbors. These are things that we get over. We're able to move around and still have these conversations. This is no different. And so we just have to learn to lean in different, ask questions, and be honest. I want to have this conversation with you, but I don't know how to do it. And I need your help. Can you help me? This is what I want to know, or this is what I'd like to ask.
Mhm.
And I think what happens then when we're vulnerable and we're leaning in, then we don't take the options away from the individual who's receiving that information from us. And they have the option to say, well, that was big of you. Yeah, let me help you. This is how we start this, and this is how we do that. Practice makes perfect. So you can't do it on a Monday and never pick it back up again for another year. It's something that you have to continue to practice. And I say, you'll learn individuals. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is about trust, and it's about learning. It's about self-awareness. It's about being aware of other individuals. And I think when we put it into practice, you start to learn your environment and be able to celebrate differences in learning. And when you have that mindset, nothing's off limits. Nothing at all is off limits.
Are you familiar with Verna Myers? And she's
I love her.
She's one of my idols. But when you're talking about celebrating, it reminded me of the party, right? Like, diversity is being invited to the party.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Inclusion is being asked to dance, and that's what you were just saying, right? It's like, look, I want to ask you to dance here.
Yeah, and with that, I always add, because I always use that quote, because she's awesome to break down what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is. But I did add something to her, as I said, and then when you talk about belonging, so somebody's on that dance floor, and I might be Beyonce dropping it like it's hot, and somebody else comes on that floor, and their dance looks different from mine. But I don't criticize that dance. I don't judge that dance. I look at it and say, nice dance. Different from mine.
Different moves, different strokes.
I can learn. Yeah, maybe I can learn that move. So I think, when we become aware and open-minded, we just allow ourselves to grow and learn more. And I think when we do that, conversations become easier. Maybe not easy, but easier.
Yeah. Do you think there's any technology or tools or techniques that can help?
You know what? I am for me, it's a little different. I think so. I will say LinkedIn is an awesome tool. So on LinkedIn, you not only find individuals and organizations, you can find trainings of any sort from A to Z. So definitely LinkedIn. I think for everybody is different though, right? Because while I may be a visual learner, someone else may need to see numbers or statistics. And I think that is a part of the journey, learning how you learn information. And what it means is that you got to do the research on your own, because sometimes individuals aren't able to give it to you the way that you're able to receive it. But if you
Mm-hmm.
know it's
Good point.
there, then you have to take that extra step to learn, to identify, to research. For me, I'm a talker. I love communicating. So talk to me all day long. You know, that's who I am. I'm a visual person as well. But someone else may not be as visual as myself. And so I think too, in this journey, it's learning how you're able to receive information.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take that extra step to do that research and find out what works for you and how you're able to receive it best.
Yeah, that is actually where diversity starts with us, right?
Yeah,
Like elevate your
absolutely.
own awareness. Is
Yeah.
there anything else you think that we, capital WE, as individuals can do to help understand or acknowledge or reduce unconscious bias within ourselves, our society, in our
Yeah,
workplace?
I do. You know, you were talking earlier about the group of individuals who say something and you may not necessarily agree. You know, I look at individuals and you have to meet folks where they are. I think that's real important to meet folks where they are. But I think we do have to understand the power we have as individuals to continuously put information out there for others. So if I'm in a group of individuals who, let's say they don't look like me, let's say they don't look like me, they have a different background, different experiences, it's diverse. And if
Mm-hmm.
conversation is happening and I'm not necessarily either understanding or agreeing with that, it almost becomes, you know, if we're talking about it starting with us, a responsibility to say, hey, that's interesting that you feel that way. I don't see it that way. This is the way I see it. And we have to start advocating for ourselves, for one, being an ally for ourselves and information that we're putting out there. And then most importantly, we got to be our friend, right? And I'm not talking about the other folks in the group. We have to be our friend. We have to say, hey, that didn't make me feel too good, but what would make me feel better? Maybe me speaking up to say, hey, I didn't really see it that way. Would love to hear more about why you thought that, because this is the way I think about it. In that situation, you've got individuals now that are able to learn from each other. Does that mean they're going to agree? No, it may not, but they can learn from each other. And when
Mm-hmm.
you open up that space of learning and awareness, that's when the shift happens. That's exactly when that shift happens. And so, you know, you look at individuals who are in certain positions, whether it's in a company, in an organization, um, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to raise your hand and say, you know what? I hear what you're saying, but let's look at it this way as well. And I think we owe it not only to other individuals, but we owe it to ourselves. If we're really wanting the shift and to make a change, not only in organizations, but in this world as a whole, that's what we have to do. People say to me all the time, will we ever get rid of biases? Will we ever get rid of microaggressions? No, and that's not to be negative Nancy, but we'll never, ever get rid of them completely. But what we will do when we start to speak up, start to empower other individuals and start to kind of open up that mind frame and that shift, we may not stop them forever, but what we will do is make people aware. So if I know, Sylvia, that you know, there's something that I could say that could offend you because someone has made me aware of that, then I move around you differently. right? And there's a respect. And I think that's what we're missing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that respect, the lack of communication, which allows for that shift. So I think speaking up, even in times where it's not comfortable to speak up, speaking up is what we have to do.
It's about acceptance, and the acceptance
Yes.
starts with us too, right?
Yes,
Like
it
accepting
does.
and being your own friend or advocate
Yes, it
to
does.
be able to speak your mind, whether it's uncomfortable or wrong, right? And some
Yeah,
people are just plain wrong, right? Some people are just
absolutely.
plain wrong. I can be just
Absolutely.
plain wrong, right?
And I think if we continue to have, again, we go back to saying, Sylvia, you're not perfect. Kelly, you're not perfect. Joe Smo, you're not perfect. Whoever, we're not perfect beings. And in this journey, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it is forever changing. And as soon as we accept that and embrace it and know that, maybe a little uncomfortable, but I'm gonna have to change with it, then this shift comes. And I think
Yeah.
it's just getting people comfortable with change and with the
Because
shift.
change is continual, right? The
Yes, it
road,
is.
like I just wrote a recap of last year's Smart Inclusion Talks, and the title of it is "The Road is Long," right?
Oh, it's long.
Well, but it's not only long, there's no end, right? The road literally goes
Exactly.
on
Yeah,
forever. So, well, thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a terrific conversation.
awesome.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspective and your expertise, for the human resources and HR community. And
Yes,
I do
thank
want to
you.
end up with one thing that Lizzo said, but I think this is an Oprah quote, right?
Okay, okay,
I think she was quoting Oprah, right?
okay.
But she said, in a world where you could be anything, be
Mhm.
yourself.
Be yourself. I love it.
So that was my
Nobody better than yourself, right?
well, and be true to yourself, right?
Yes,
That's a very old
yes,
adage. So that's what you were saying. It's like when you're in that group think or wherever, be true. Like, why do I think that way?
right.
Speak up.
Yeah,
But I do think these
absolutely.
conversations are very important, and I appreciate you championing the cause, and certainly wish you a
Absolutely.
lot of success. It's been my great pleasure to
Thank
speak
you
with
so
you
much.
today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.